this is the San Diego Comic-Con virtual panel. It's a story panel with Image Comics. My name is Marla Eizik. I'm the executive assistant at Image Comics, and we have a bunch of excellent creators here who are going to swear the whole time, and
Hey.
I'm into it. So I think I'll just introduce everybody first. We have Ed Brubaker, who's putting out Cruel Summer. Yay. Chuck Brown with On the Stump. Yay. Matt Fraction with Adventureman. Alex Campi with Dracula, Motherf. And Emma, is it Kubert? I'm sorry, I didn't get your last name. Kubert, okay, yeah. With Inkblot, which I'm very excited for.
Yay.
Yay. Thanks for joining us, everybody. How are you all
Marla,
doing?
we refer to the title as Drac Mofo, just to get around the swear filters.
Good to know. That's better than Mother Effer. Yeah.
Dracula Melon Farmer. We can take the
Melon Farmer.
The UK airline version of Die Hard, they changed the Yippee-ki-yay to Yippee-ki-yay Melon Farmer, so you could swear.
Wow. Did they think that nobody would notice that? That's just
no, for the airplane version.
They tried the absolute least. It was great.
Mother brother. I saw Mother Brother on one of them. I remember.
Mother brother. Ooh, I don't like that.
Yeah, no, it's terrible. It's just uncle.
Right. He's my father. Slap. Sorry, I just spoiled Chinatown.
Oh, dang it. Oh, no. How are you all doing with quarantine? Is it the same for you? Is it different? I mean, do you like this better than being in person at a con? I mean,
not quite the same. Not quite the same.
No.
Yeah, I would say it's not quite the same. And also, being in quarantine as an artist is the same. So
yeah, that's kind of the consensus I've been getting. Is like it's weird, but also it hasn't changed day to day that much.
I actually found that I want to go out more because I'm forced to be inside, but
oh yeah,
as soon as it's like lifted, I'll probably be like, okay, I'm gonna stay back.
Yeah,
I'm gonna stay inside now.
Last week, the mayor of our city put a curfew out, and we instantly were like, oh well, we have to go wander the streets now. We have to like go out there because they told us not to. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, I'm an indoorsman normally, so this is
indoorsman.
Totally
I like
indoorsman. What? Great indoors, Matt.
No, I get it.
Comic nurse.
Yeah, no. Federally mandated plan canceling is like my personal purge. So having kids is the biggest adjustment. And
I don't know how you do it.
I just don't like
there's this sort of it's really no different. Like,
well, for you.
Welcome to the world of teleschooling.
Yeah, I have more frequent panic attacks now when encountering people. There was always like a small amount of them when encountering people, but now it's like, did that person give it to me? Anytime I have to like go out to the store or whatever, and like,
oh man,
it's a bit weird. It's like going through an airlock to come home, kind of, and then you feel fine, But also, then I look outside and like 80% of my town just is acting like it's over. So I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Same here.
Yeah. And by the way, this will air in 2 months, and it may be.
Oh man, I forgot about that.
But probably not.
Yeah, I don't know. Are things different? Future world? It's hard to say.
In the future.
Ooh. Yeah. Alex, you're over are you in New York on the East Coast?
I'm in the middle of Manhattan. Yep.
Oh my God.
Actually, it's been good because I can go outside and like there are people I don't necessarily have to interact with them, but I do see other humans.
Yeah.
On a regular. That's one of the reasons I'm here. Just because for the way I work, I do better when I can walk to places and see people and like I plan my career fairly like specifically. And everything else just gets let go. So like, I don't, if I have to grocery shop, I need to be somewhere where I can just walk around the corner and buy groceries. Like having to get in a car and drive somewhere for 45 minutes to buy groceries would be my personal nightmare. And one of my big coping mechanisms was seeing movies in theaters. Oh, well,
yeah.
But that helped a lot being here because I'm within walking distance of like 4 or 5 really great repertory theaters, and a few of the ones that screen all the Netflix stuff that's up for Oscars for its so it'll have its like theatrical. Yeah. My daughter's been really doing really well. Like she actually has been pretty good at remote schooling, and I mean she's 9, so it's a little bit like she's at an age where it's easier. And also I've had like the busiest time of my entire career in the past 4 months. Like I'm kind of envious of all my friends who are like, yeah, I just decided to rewatch all of Mad Men. I'm like where is my I kind of want my little vacation. Yeah. Instead, I'm like having anxiety attacks about the fact that I've got 3 books due at the end of the month.
Yeah, it's a lot all at once. Yeah, because you're still working. Like you all are working on series, and it's still happening, and it's hard to juggle.
Hasn't stopped.
I have to go let my dog in, and she's gonna bark over everybody's answer.
Okay. Go for it.
Yeah, it's weird too because it's like I had about a week of not being able to do anything, but then it was just like everybody still needs pages. Everybody still wants to,
right?
You know, and then you have like if you are doing work in Hollywood, you're having like weird Zoom meetings where people are carrying their laptop around their house like a Spike Lee tracking shot.
Yes, I did that the other day. It was very weird. Yeah.
It's kind of awesome when the background is moving around the person, and it's like, oh, well, that's kind of exciting. Little movement in the meeting.
Yeah. I've had to do some prose stuff as well, and I've been procrastinating on this like annoyingly high profile short story I have to write. For like one of the few people I do work for hire for, and I finally broke through it last week, and then like I feel like I can write again now in a way, because a lot of what I was doing was lettering and production work and managing like the Maddie Kickstarter and stuff like that. And now I've had to write various projects throughout, but this is the first one where I'm like, okay, I'm back.
Yeah. You're
it's been tough. It's like, you know, sometimes the pages come easy, and sometimes you're just like, I have to do this. It has to be good. I'm just gonna carry on.
Yeah. I'm curious how you all are kind of trying to, I don't know how far ahead you work, but how you try to not write current events into the series that you're writing. How do you kind of separate yourself from like the story from what is the world right now? If that makes sense. I mean, Chuck, your book is kind of, it's political, so it's going to be.
Well, to me, the world's always been this way in a sense, except for, you know, the lockdowns. But other than that, everything's pretty much the same. You know, it's things being brought to the forefront that we can see more clearly now, the technology, things. But honestly, I just kind of put myself into everything I write as normal. It doesn't really affect me that much to what's happening now. I mean, just it's some urgency to put it out now, to get it out into the world and to get the work done. But you know,
but those themes have always been important to you. I mean,
it's always been a part of me. Yeah, I mean, what's going on in the world and politics and police brutality and things. So,
yeah, it's important to keep that theme, especially with your work. I mean, it would be impossible not to.
Sometimes even hard to even get started or write or work on this kind of stuff now. It's like it's bigger than comics. You know, the issue is like I don't want to write and try to get it out there and try to get it published. I mean, I'll write it and put it down on the paper, but as far as getting it out to the world and finding my audience and doing the hustling, you're not really in the mood for all that. You just want to put it down.
Totally.
Yeah.
You kind of have to read the room and take a moment.
I kind of find it's important to like see what's going out there while, you know, you are writing your own story. Because like for me, I'm doing a fantasy story and it's very separate from this world, I would say. But a lot of what's happening is, you know, it's always influenced. But right now I like to use this kind of, I guess, energy. But as Chuck said, it's always been this way, but now we're actually facing what's happening and we're trying to change it. And I feel like, you know, as creators in Image Comics, we're trying to do, you know, something different than regular comics, and what's happening in the world is change and it is good. So having that influence what you're doing, even if it is very separate, I think it's really important.
Yeah. And I mean,
and not just and for now, not just me for now, but sometimes my influences have been subconsciously seeping into my work. Not just what's going on now, but in the past.
Yeah.
You'll be writing a story and you'll have your idea of your core concept, but then you'll realize other things that you have issues with in your life start seeping in, or what's going on in the news in the world. So
Definitely.
even if someone is trying to ignore it, not ignore it, but kind of separate themselves from fantasy right now, it may seep into your work, into your core message somehow. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But fantasy is always operated as an allegory for, the present world, as has science fiction, as has historical work. Like, would I want to read a book right now? I'm dreading the quarantine screenplays that are going to be coming out.
Oh my God.
Like, if you're doing this, please stop. Just stop. Don't do it. Like, think of something else. But the distancing lens of speculative fiction or fantasy or history is often the only way that we can really process this stuff and also receive some sort of catharsis. Because I'm living it. I don't want to read it.
Yeah.
And it's also still, we're still being entertaining as well as on that aspect. It's like we want to entertain, but we also want to inform. And having just, our own stories with the outside world affecting it, it can really bring like everyone that reads it to know what we're talking about without actually saying it.
Exactly. Yeah. Bringing those themes without being overt.
Yeah. Well, it's like Chuck said too. It's like the world is in your work, whether you want it to be or not. Like the world, whatever you expose yourself to, ends up being what you write about. Whatever is like inside of you, and we're all, it's different when you're writing, say, Batman or Spider-Man or the two of them. I gotta keep seeing that shirt. But it's like when you're just writing whatever it is that's like your passion at that moment, like all of your human experience that you need to write about at that moment. That's one of the great things about creator-owned comics to me is like you never have to write a story you don't want to write. And it's like my book that got delayed the day that we had a book shipping to the printer the day the shutdown happened. Oh, man. So it's now coming out like the week of Comic-Con, and it's a book called Pulp that takes place during the Great Depression. That's about like an ex-Pinkerton and an ex-Wild West outlaw who decided to rob the Nazis in New York City, the American Nazis. And I was obviously like channeling so much of my own frustration at the world, like before, just looking at the world the last 20 years of my life, basically, in this slow slide towards fascism in America. And, so much of what I've written about in the last 5 years has just been that. And this one is also like, I also wrote it after I almost drowned. So there's a huge subplot in it that I didn't even realize until I was done writing. And I was like, oh, this is just me processing my own like fear of death and having almost like left my wife with nothing. So, it's just weird. You just write about whatever is sort of burning to get out of you. That's like how I always tell everybody, like whatever you're writing, don't worry about writing something you think everybody wants to read. Like they'll want to read like the best thing that you can write that you need to write right then.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I've always told the babies, like, never write what you think people want, because if they don't want it, then you'll be really sad because you wrote something for them, not for you.
Yeah.
And then they reject it. Like, if you just write something for yourself and assume that, like, even if it's really niche and weird and you think nobody's going to read it, like, make yourself happy. And then if not a damn person buys it, it's fine because you made yourself happy. Try to write the best story you can. And that's all. You can't predict what the market wants.
The only thing you have control over.
Yeah. And there's too many people to try to write for anyway. So like it would be impossible to try to write for anyone.
Yeah.
And
whatever you do, someone's not going to like it. So who cares?
Yeah.
I had a great idea the other day and I was like 5 steps into it and I'm like, oh, this is Harry Potter.
I'm pretty sure every writer has done that. Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
I actually had a question that's kind of around that theme. When you do have a story idea, if something pops into your head, do you tell people, like Ed, I'm sure eventually you tell Sean, but do you or your team, like how far into that idea do you start talking about that idea with loved ones, or do you kind of just keep the lid on and try to keep that pressure cooking?
Loved ones do not read my work.
Really?
Unless they buy it off the internet. No, I would tell Matt probably. I tell Matt and a few other friends. We have like a group of people that we kind of chat around a lot during the day.
It's
procrastinating from work. I tell Matt ideas before I've decided whether or not I even want to do it, and a lot of it is his reaction or several of our other friends' reactions. Sometimes we'll judge whether or not there's a germ of something.
Yeah, it's always like fairly without nuance when you do it. You know, it's kind of like, is this something? You know, it's a very top level, like it's, yeah, there's just no nuance, and there's a phase where it's not quite subconscious, but like pre-conscious, and your internal reader is trying to decide, is this a story? Is this a meal? You know, and
yeah.
You know,
it was you and a few other people encouraging me to do Last of the Innocent that even made me do that story, because I was like, this is crazy, right? No one will want to read this.
Right.
And your practical joke of going, agreeing, like, no, everybody wants to read this.
I didn't tell anyone about On the Stump for a very long time. I was afraid to put it out. And it's like Alex said, you got to write, what you love and what you care about, because I didn't think anyone would either get it or like it or buy it. It's something I had to put out there, something I really enjoyed, and I want to get it out there. But normally I kind of keep stuff on the wraps because I think it sucks, and that's why I don't tell people about what I'm doing. But, yeah, I'm more a low-key guy, I guess.
Yeah.
I think for me, it's a little different since I work with the beloved one. And so as soon as I think of something, I'm just like, what do you think of this? And then he'll add to it, like Rusty will add to it, and then I'll add to that. And it's a very back and forth moment. I mean, I would say when I was younger and maybe in school more, I was a bit more vulnerable, a bit like more insecure about sharing my ideas because, you don't want to like share something that's very personal and then someone's like, no, that doesn't work. And it can hurt your feelings.
Put time and energy into the idea and you're starting to flesh it out, and then
like the more you practice, I mean, at least for me, the more I practice talking to like anyone, it wasn't just like a loved one, it was just people who were creative and loved stories. I would talk to them about it and I would practice, and that's what really made me good at just coming up with an idea and then back and forthing it with Rusty, basically.
Yeah.
I go one of two ways. Like, I've been moving towards just making these big books. Like, I write kind of 250-page graphic novels now, and that's what I do. That like the big books, like they live in my notebook for a really long time. I have a paper moleskin with stickers all over it, like a high school girl. And I just write it out there, and like, I'm waiting to see if the character and the feeling turns into something is really a story, or is just kind of like the Mistress project that I'm playing with, because the other thing I'm working on is too hard. I'm in the middle of Act 2 on the big book, and I'm like, well, maybe I'll write something about an FBI agent. Is that character going to exist as something I really want to like spend a couple of years on? I don't know yet. I'm just going to keep adding to it every so often and then figuring it out. And then I have these short books, and Ed, I owe you like a debt of gratitude for the My Heroes Have Always Been Junkies Bad Weekend hardback format. That was something really wonderful that happened to me, because I also do these side projects where, when you're in the middle of a 250-page book, it's going to take 3 years to produce because people are doing it around other projects. I can go off and do like a 60-page, 72-page graphic novel, which is what Dracmofo was with Erica. It's an exploitation book. It's a Dracula reimagining. It's also a lot about like Me Too and female empowerment and female victimization. Because the petty hill that I will die on is that Dracula should not be handsome. Like it's women going, oh, I'm so in love with him, he's so beautiful. No, Dracula is Harvey Weinstein. Oh shit, I swore again. Like nobody in the history of time has wanted to F-U-C-K Harvey Weinstein. Like even his wife was probably, I don't mean to kink shame, like maybe like looking like Jabba the Hutt, really like red fringe. Like, bless you, please carry on. But most people like, no. but that, you know, and he preyed on a whole bunch of people, but other people went to him willingly. And those are the women I'm interested in. I'm interested in the Melania Trumps of this world, like the women who looked at that as a viable career option. You know, Dracula's brides, I want them to have gone into it with their eyes open, knowing, you know, and maybe in the back of their mind, they were like, well, maybe I'll be the one that like convinces him I'm special. Like, no, you won't, honey.
Right.
And this is the long-term, you know, Dracula as a long-term serial predator, and stuck in LA because it's everyone, when they try to reimagine Dracula, they always put him in another big Gothic city like London, and it just doesn't work. Like, you can't redo that, you know, in the same environment as the original kind of Victorian Gothic horror. But LA is a terrifying place for me. LA gives me anxiety.
I'm in LA right now.
It's
insane.
Like the darkness, the shadows, the isolation, getting stuck places, you know, especially because I'm putting this in 1974 when, you know, like you couldn't exactly just flip out your mobile phone and call someone or like call an Uber. And, you know, that's the sort of project that, you know, and Erica and I approached it with this those projects, I'll go to an artist and be like, hey, let's do a short thing that's going to be short enough to keep you from going insane and that you can do around other stuff. What do you want to draw? What are we going to experiment with visually? And the visual inspiration for Dracmofo is a lot of Japanese super flat art, especially seen in things like Madoka Magica or other, you know, anime like Pride in FMA Brotherhood, Hellsing when Alucard went sort of all incorporeal and full of eyes. And also because it flips back, you know, the beginning is in, you know, 1890s Vienna is Klimt, which is also super flat art. So, you know, we're coming with an aesthetic point of view, and it's a lab experiment, and we knock off a 72-page thing that's like a story experiment and a lab and a visual experiment, and we just throw it out there. And again, if no one buys it, that's fine.
Yeah.
But it's also not 2 years of your life, you know, in 3 years or 5 years, you know, it's a lab you dip into. I was having, you know, it's a thing to warm your hands up when you don't want to do what's actually due that day, you know.
Totally.
It's always the best thing I've written is whatever's coming next, and the worst thing I've written is whatever just came out. So like, it's a place to like go daydream about what I'll get right next time, you know.
Yeah, that's really important. It's like looking at every story as how can I be better than I was last book? How can I continue to improve? And it's weird that like the more you write, the more you become conscious of like how much more there is to learn. You know, when you start off writing and you have a couple books out, you think you're pretty good. When you have about 10 books out, you realize you're pretty terrible.
Well, there was a Steve Wacker at Marvel, and one of my favorite things anybody said about comics was like Wednesday is the worst day in comics because it's the day all your mistakes get made permanent.
Jesus.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Do any of you like open up your old books and look at them again, or as soon as they're out, they're just like consigned to like?
Yeah.
Proofreading is the last time I look at them if I can avoid it.
I make sure the pages are in order and that there isn't any glaring errors in like a hardback, because I've had that happen once at Marvel. I had a hardback where they had some glitches, and of course it was the first thing that was mentioned on Amazon, and it came out, so that was great.
I let it my own book, so I don't have like if there are any major production glitches, I'm the one doing pre-press, so it's my fault.
Yeah.
No pressure.
It wasn't my fault.
Just makes it more
I
painful.
did not look at the pre-press, and now I do. Because it was a 500-page book. I was like, someone else looked at
We'll
this.
look at it. Production will look at it. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't remember what we were talking about.
Well,
I got us off onto tangents, sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. That's good. Tangents are good.
I was going to say about the graphic novel thing. Well, Matt's been doing this with November now too, but like, I love that digestible amount of stuff, but you really need a great artist that's like someone who's steady. I mean, you can do it with anybody, obviously. In fact, a lot of my European artist friends are like, I like to draw only 40 pages a year. That's great. But like Sean Phillips, like I can stop and do like a graphic novel with him that takes like 3 months of his life to draw an entire graphic novel. Like, and I was like, holy shit, we should do this. Oh, sorry, I said the S word. But that just occurred to me when he'd been bugging me about doing that. I had an idea for a book, and I was like, it'd be better not to break this into 3 issues of a comic or 4 issues of a comic, and just to do it.
Yeah,
and I think
exactly.
like a Usagi Yojimbo like hardback or something, and I was like, why don't I do this format? I bet this will sell. And it ended up being like, I just had no idea if anyone would really like it at all. And it was after a few friends read it when it was done and liked it, then, oh, okay. Because I was like,
it works really well in physical bookstores because it racks the spines thick enough that you can actually see it.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Those are, I care a lot about the paper and all that stuff. Like we deal a lot with I know Matt goes over this stuff with Image too. Like my favorite person at Image is the people always in charge of my printing, because I'm like,
Hillary and Heather, they're very good at it. They're obsessed with paper. They know what they're doing.
Yeah, I love a paper nerd.
Yeah.
You guys see the floppies maybe going away and we doing more of the graphic novels? Do you guys see that happening in the near future, or floppies aren't going away anytime soon, in your opinion?
I mean, it definitely seems like the OGNs are kind of becoming more popular for sure.
I mean, the biggest selling comics in the world are young adult graphic novels and kids graphic novels, stuff that most comic stores don't even carry, or a lot of comic stores don't even carry on. I personally, like, this will have been announced by the time Comic-Con, so like the thing Sean and I are doing now is like a series of graphic novels that are going to come out like every 3 or 4 months, actually.
It's the same November.
Yeah, exactly, except yours is a continuing story. Ours are
like a novella, split up into.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I saw what you were doing there too. I was like, oh.
I mean, to me, it seems like graphic novels are like, binging for comics at this point. It's like you have like, instead of you having a single episode or a single issue, you have like a whole season or a whole book that you can read. And that's probably why it's becoming more popular.
Well, especially for a generation that grew up reading manga a lot. And
yeah,
that's
exactly.
a lot of female creators, because there just weren't comics about women that weren't awful. There were
I understand that.
Written by women. And back to your point, I think there's space out there for everything. I mean, we all pale in comparison to Lore Olympus, the Webtoons comic. Like the most popular Webtoons comic has been read by 300 million people. We're out. Like we're peanuts compared to that. So it really just comes down to what are you as a creator most happy creating. I'm not a good enough writer to write month by month. I have to write the whole thing ahead of time. So it just even something like Bad Karma, like Ryan got 275 pages of that. Like he got like the first chapter just to see if he liked it. And then I just went away, and 6 months later came back and like, here's all of it. Tell me the parts you hate and we'll change it. And so I just, because I wasn't writing chapter by chapter, I decided to write the whole thing. Let's just publish the whole thing.
Yeah, right.
But it's there's nothing against monthly comics. There's nothing against webcomics. Like,
no, they're good.
Comics are big. You can find the format that makes you happy, or you can find a couple of formats. I mean, there's nothing that says you can't do one and then the other. Like, I think there's a lot of I think it's really important in some ways for creators to experiment with different formats and different lengths, because they teach you different things. I mean, writing, I've got a serial running in 2000 AD, 5 to 6 page installments. I wrote the whole thing in one go, because
every 5 pages you had to have like an ending.
Sorry?
But every 5 pages you had to have an ending, like
or an oh moment or a wow
cliffhanger. Yeah.
So that's a skill. Like I did a lot of like Twitter webcomic stuff that was like little 8-panel stuff. That's a skill. I'm really interested in doing strip comics, like the old Sally the Sleuth stuff that was like 6 pages of setup, 6 pages of resolution, all 6-panel grid, like Instagram. It would be great. The Grass of Parnassus, which the Eminence did. Like, just, it would be silly for there to exist all these wonderful visual formats and not to try them, because you learn from every single one of them. I remember Tom Scioli, who's amazing, challenging me one time. He's like, you should write a comic like Jim Steranko and have it all be spreads. Like, go look at a bunch of Jim Steranko spreads, write a 24-page story like that. And I was like, that's going to be really hard. And then immediately wanted to do it, because that's the sort of asshole I am. So.
Do the rest of you plot everything out the same way? Do you write it all in one go, or do you look issue by issue, or if you do want to do a OGN, do you just write it all out at once, or how do you split it up?
Most people don't do this. I know I'm a weirdo. I know I'm strange.
Emma, I guess we'll start with you.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I would say that I'm probably more of an artist than a writer in general. But the way that like we do Inkblot is basically kind of like the Marvel method, where Rusty and I, we literally say like a couple sentences, that's the plot of our issue. And then I'll lay out 20 pages of everything, and then he'll ink it, I'll color it, and then he'll go in and letter it and write the dialogue in there at the end. And I mean, doing it that way, for me, I love that process because it's very cohesive, it's very collaborative. It uses both of our strengths to create a story that's really from the both of us, from like the whole creative team, instead of the other traditional way. But I've done it that way too.
Does Rusty look at it while you're doing like the drawing and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, we're constantly like what happens is that we constantly go back and forth. But for me, I lay out the 20 pages and I pencil it, and as I'm penciling it, he goes and inks. He thinks about what kind of dialogue there is.
Oh wow! So you guys don't talk about it as he's not like.
No, I mean, we really have like, it's a very collaborative thing where I'm very much in charge of like the action part of the script while he's doing like the words, because I'm not much of a wordsmith, to be quite honest. Like I can't even talk that well. So it's like
you need your Stanley.
Yeah, exactly. But that's basically what we do, and I don't know, it just kind of turns out really well. I mean, you definitely have to have like a partner that's very suited for you and how you work.
Right.
But I think that's like the main two things of writing a story is you have the action, you have the dialogue, and you know, one person can do it and two people can do it. And I don't know, this is just an interesting way that works for us. You know?
Yeah, I'm the exact opposite. I write I write incredibly detailed scripts that call shot sizes and angles, and then hand it to the artist and say, please change anything you want. But it's like,
that's a good way of doing that with an artist.
I don't feel like I'm not a good enough writer to write Marvel method. Like, I feel like I have to ensure that there's like a baseline visual pacing. So like if I was working with you and you were having a bad day and you're like, oh, I've got a headache, I don't want to be drawing this, but I have to get these pages done this week, the script would be there and you'd be like, oh, okay, so this is a close-up, this is a wide, this is, you know, a high angle shot. I'll just do this. And then on the days where you're like, yeah, I've had my coffee and like, you know, I'm gonna be the greatest artist ever and we're gonna get Eisner for this book. Like you'd be like, oh yeah, she wants 9 panels. I'll do 12, you know, or something like that. And it's fine because I'm going back and lettering it. So I know I read dialogue on the art when I'm lettering anyway, like not majorly, but you know, I can cope with whatever the artist changes because I'm gonna be changing stuff anyway. Like I do a lot of my sound effecting on the art. I put in temp sound effects.
It sounds like you still kind of do it that way, just, you know, partly. I mean, for me, I'm very bad at details, so I can't particularly do it your way either, you know? It's like just the way my brain thinks. It's like I'm a very big picture kind of person, so I can come up with actions and what people are doing, but like when it comes to the nitty gritty details, I'm kind of like, Rusty, what are they doing? What are they saying?
Play to your strengths.
Another reason I write the whole thing though is because like I often write thrillers, and sometimes in chapter 5 you'll be like, oh, I want to put this thing back in chapter 1 that foreshadows the cool thing I just thought of in chapter 5.
That's another reason. It's like you have to set it up if it's a mystery. Like for us, it's a fantasy. So it's like all we need to know is the plot, and then I can just visually like picture it and do it. Yeah. But with a mystery, you know, you have to know the whole thing. You gotta know everything.
But I think the point is like, it's really, really, really important to collaborate with your artist, because as a writer, you don't have all the good ideas. And if you're like trying to just, you know, like you need to leave space for people to bring their own genius into the project. And like encourage them and make them feel good about their contributions, and you'll get such a better book by giving them space to do their thing and bring all their knowledge and experience and skill to the book.
Right. Yeah, Matt, with Adventureman, how is it working with the Dodsons? How do you guys collaborate that way?
Well, we got to kind of learn how to do it on someone else's dime, so we kind of knew how we wanted to work. I work in all kinds of different ways with everybody I work with, and whether that's a full script or plot style, which I really enjoy, and makes the book more collaborative to me. But you know, we sort of had the feeling of like, that first issue was so big, not because we thought, you know what, let's make the first issue 64 pages because like $3.99 doesn't go as far as it used to, and you know, it kept growing because that sort of joy of doing it for yourself. And we don't have to stop at 20 pages. We don't have to stop at 22 pages. And so Terry would be like, all right, I made the scene like 4 pages. I'm like, oh, okay. You know, and it kind of just kept growing and growing and growing. So there's just a natural outgrowth of that. But also watching him kind of develop the world. You know, I went through and I did lettering passes on 1 through 4 all at once. And it really wasn't until like a lot of the coloring was done that like the world kind of clicked and felt real. It just was a sort of developmental process. But like the flip side to that is like with Sex Criminals, I write a very full script to the point of breaking down, but it's all done on a grid. So but it's all like, you know, November is even more formal than that. So like I can versatile and how I write and how it gets done. For Terry, it's really about like just here's the emotional beat, go nuts.
Yeah.
You still keep different notebooks like for every project and stuff?
Yeah.
I mean, that makes sense. That I feel like that's the most. It's a very visual way of like jumping from project to project, especially with a lot of you working on a lot of different things at once.
I would just lose stuff.
Yeah.
You know, wait, where did I write that down? You know, and so it just was easier to do that.
Exactly. Chuck, how is it working with your artist on the Stump?
Well, with on the Stump, I normally when Bitterroot as well, I kind of plot everything out. It's not like super detailed, but I got to know how the arc ends, so I know where I'm going as I'm writing.
Yeah.
Sometimes that may change. The ending pretty much stays the same, but all the guts in the middle may change as I make my journey towards the character's end or the story's end. And it's like Alex said as well, I do write detailed panel descriptions and dialogue, but I also say, hey, feel free to change this, add a panel, delete a panel. If you want to add a page, delete a page, let me know, and we'll work it out, because, you know, they're the ones kind of leading the charge in a way. You know, I want them to kind of put their input into what's going on. Of course, Sanford Green, he does whatever he wants, so it's all good.
And it turns out great. Like
it always does. Yeah, they're the kind of artists we can just give them the script and just kind of go nuts and do their thing.
You have to have that trust there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The metaphor I always use is like, before I get started, it's like we're going to take a road trip without a map, but I have a general understanding of the geography. Like, let's say we're going to drive from California to New York. Like, if you get to desert, you're going the wrong way, and if you don't cross the Mississippi in 2 or 3 days, you're off track. So like I kind of have like landmarks.
Yeah.
That's a good way of describing it.
But it's infuriating because it always feels in like the last third like it was disorganized and lazy, and all I see is what I could have done differently and all that. But at the same time, like you can call audibles and steer into the strength of a book once you see it and know what it is a little bit better. Like, and so I've been able on a couple of times to sort of, you know, hey, let's, you know, rather than let's swing by Chicago first before we get to New York or whatever, you know what I mean? To kind of fortuitously extend the metaphor that if I kind of pre-wrote it before I got to see things and kind of live in that world visually, I think I'd miss opportunities to write, not just to the strength of the artist and my, you know, not just to play to my partner's strengths, but just what the book is itself.
Totally. You have to have that freedom to move around.
Yeah.
I'm less of a world builder though. Like, I'm a character. I don't do a lot of fantasy and sci-fi because I just forget to build those parts of it.
The mythology. Yeah.
So there's less of a need to inhabit the whole world. And often I'm, yeah.
Like, it just is a tonal thing, not like, oh, I needed to know what like sandwiches look like here necessarily, but like there's a just, I don't know, when part of the, I mean, I think everybody here would, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, but there's a joy in the result of the collaboration where it's not just yours and it's not just your partners, it is ours, and it is always instructive for me.
I've definitely had a character appear in like a scene and been like, I had no ideas for that character until I saw it drawn, and then like, oh, he's the star of the next story, or just those moments when, I mean, I've been working with the same artist for almost 20 years now. So our collaborative process is he never wants me to tell him what's coming next. He just wants to be the first reader. Right. He never wants me to tell him what the story, he'll want the gist of like, if we're going to do a new thing, it's about a guy who a demon tells him he has to kill someone every month. Oh, okay, fine, that sounds good. But where is it? Can it be in London? I'm like, no, it's not going to be in London. You're going to have to draw New York. But yeah, I just, one of the great things about monthly comics and about like doing the slow serialization of a graphic novel that way is that if you're like, I'm more like Matt, I always think of it as like you're either an architect or a gardener. It's like someone told me that one, and it's like when you're starting a garden as a writer, like what plant you're trying to grow, but you don't exactly know what it's going to end up like. What you'd like it to be. It's the same thing. Like where you're going. Like I have like guideposts that I'm like, I know this happens, this happens, and this happens, and I know the end is this. I usually know the end, even if I will get to the end of something else instead sometimes. Yeah. But yeah, I feel like if I don't leave myself that space in the middle of it, I think I learned doing monthly comics basically. Totally. Like there's a certain joy in when you discover that as you're working on a story, like, oh, hey, I didn't plan this out so tightly that I can't now go left instead of right.
And the reader's going to know what the gist is.
And I think novelists, I mean, you listen, like Stephen King doesn't outline, like Dennis Lehane doesn't outline. Like a lot of my favorite novelists don't outline, but then when you talk to them, you're like, oh, you do, you're just doing it in your head constantly. Because all writers are always working, even when we're doing something else. Every single person here is secretly writing a thing in the back of their mind right now, or thinking about some moment that they're stuck on, so like, I feel like I outline pretty tightly for myself right now, but I only outline like one chapter at a time. Yeah. And I often don't look at my outline when I'm writing the script, and I'll look back at it and I'm like, oh, I only used half of this, So, but I feel like I need to know what I'm trying to do, and then discover those moments of like, oh, I did something else instead. Like, that's where you find those like moments of poetry, because comics is more like, it's the deceptive nature of writing comics is you have so few words to say what you're trying to say on every page. So you write dialogue that when people actually read it out loud, they realize like, oh, that doesn't sound like people talking. But when they read it in their head, it does. When you actually write dialogue in a screenplay, you end up writing 3 times as much stuff as you do on a comic page. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Is there anything, while we've been in quarantine, has there been a piece of media that you found recently, whether it's a comic book, a new series coming out, or TV or film, that you think does story really well, that really captures your imagination?
Who wants to go first?
Or Emma? Like I was just saying on the other panel, I just finished Fleabag for the first time, and I know I'm kind of behind, but I love that.
It's so good.
It's so simple.
I'm like the Fleabag denier. I hate it.
It's okay.
it's very that tone, the whole thing. So if you don't like that tone, if you don't like it,
no, I couldn't. Like the first episode was the longest 20 minutes of my entire life, and I couldn't get through it. But also, like coming from the UK, there's a lot of stuff that's similar in the UK. I mean, it was basically, Peep Show, the Carol Churchill parody episode, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. And I couldn't stand the whole fourth wall breaking. Like it was like it just wasn't my cup of tea. And bless everyone who loved it. I was not among them.
It wasn't for you.
Loved it.
That's good to know. That's good to know
Sorry.
about
I
yourself.
watched it on an airplane. I cried. I cried my eyes out at the last
man.
episode of season 1. I couldn't believe it. It said everything about humanity to me. but I also, the only thing I've been like seeking out escapism heavily during this, and I've found myself like picking up, I haven't read the last 5 Jack Reacher novels, or I found a used copy of Jaime Hernandez's Locust collection, which is like the first 500 pages of Love and Rockets that he did. I've been rereading a lot of that stuff. I watched this crazy show on HBO Max called The Foreigners, which I would highly recommend to anyone seeking escapism.
No, is that the time traveling immigrants?
Yes. A bunch of people just appear from random times in the past in, I think, Denmark or Sweden, wherever Vikings come from. And look, it's just the best show that you'll ever watch. It is so weird and so fun and so over the top, while also sort of being great and about humanity and about immigration. But it's like if immigrants from the past came and were hated by everybody. It's hard to explain, but it's called Be Foreigners, which is the dumbest name for a TV show of all time. But it's totally enjoyable for, just pure escapism.
Yeah.
I haven't been seeking out anything heavy at all. There's like a couple things that have come on HBO, and I'm like, give me Perry Mason, man. I'm waiting for that.
Yeah, I can't do it.
Yeah,
I'll try to escape into like a horror movie or something, and kind of the plot is some pandemic in the horror. Come on, I just wanted some ghosts.
We watched Your Highness the other night. Your Highness, the Danny McBride stoner fantasy movie.
Oh wow!
I've heard of that.
With Natalie Portman.
Oh, that's right. That looked terrible.
Yeah, I loved every moment of it. It was so bad. And jokes that did not age well. So many jokes from 10 years ago. You're like, oh my God, you could not make this joke out in any way, shape, or form. Like, yeah, it's very. We've been watching a lot of British game shows. Like, there's a great game show with David Mitchell called Would I Lie to You, where it's just people lying or telling the truth. It's pure just nonsense. And you just put it on, and 4 hours later, you're like, I laughed a lot.
What about you?
I introduced my daughter to David Mulaney specials.
Oh, John Mulaney?
John Mulaney specials.
Oh my God, I love him.
John Mulaney.
I went and saw him in Portland last year, and I cried laughing the entire time because he's the one comedian that really gets me, me in the beds.
The other comedian that I like is Mike Birbiglia. If you've seen his stuff, it's amazing. Like, him and John Mulaney are probably my favorites right now.
Yeah, his last special was really good, even for not having kids myself.
Yeah,
it was
right.
Yeah.
But I think for me, I've just been looking at. I've just been rewatching like my favorite shows, and it's more out of comfort than anything else. Like, I've just been watching like 30 Rock, The Good Place, just like a bunch of shows kind of like that. And a lot of educational stuff too, especially since, our world is kind of in chaos right now, and it's important to learn about it.
Yeah, we have to stay informed.
What you said though about like comfort, it's like I think about that. I've been thinking about that ever since I started getting published and doing especially doing like work for hire. Like, I was trying to think about that. But the idea of serialized fiction or just comfort things, as artists, and when we're growing up and when we're like younger and wanting to like start out, like you start to like, it's so easy to dismiss that idea of creating something that gives people comfort because it's not art, or it's, and it's trash. Like, I remember my dad like looking at some book I was reading, oh, that's trash, read this, like read literature. And it's like, I think that what we do in comics, that creation of something that can just give people comfort in these, I've never appreciated it more than I do now.
No, I agree, definitely. I mean, like, the reason why I'm doing a fantasy comic is because, I grew up with loving fantasy genres and books and movies and TV. So it's like going back to that now, it's nice. It's a nice feeling. It makes me nostalgic. It makes me feel like about my childhood, you know, and it's just a nice moment when the world is so chaotic and crazy, and it helps my comic too. So it's kind of like
at the same time, totally
two-way kind of thing.
And I was like blocked for years in terms of going into prose because I come from a very literary background, and I was like, I'm not writing like this, you know, I want to write something, I want to write a novel, but it wasn't really feeling like anything literary. I couldn't find the right thing. And then like 5 years ago, I was like, I could just write trash. And I did. And it just came out in the UK, and it was very successful. So, like, you know, I just wrote like, you know, 500 pages of like chunky escapist medieval thriller. And it was so much fun. And it completely got me over the hurdle of like doing prose. Now I've got a second book coming out. And it's like, so I and you can still put interesting, thought-provoking, great moments in popular entertainment, essentially.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
that seems like a really obvious statement, but like for some reason it wasn't obvious to me. I felt like I had this like huge bar of legitimacy I had to climb over, and I was like, no, I can just go under it.
Yeah, I think in genre material you can talk about, well, you can talk about anything you want to talk about in genre material, but also you can talk about things that are much harder to talk about in more serious literature in a way. Like
back to the distancing lens of history and
yeah,
fantasy.
exactly. Well, I got addicted to mystery novels when I was working at a bookstore on Castro Street in the 90s in San Francisco. And I just would pick up, because I loved mystery movies and I loved thriller comics and, you know, like, but I'd never really read any mystery novels, even though my dad always had them around. And one of the regulars at our store was this lawyer who wrote novels about this gay lawyer who solved mysteries. And I got really addicted to this guy's books, but also because they were talking about like a world I was seeing every day on the streets that I wasn't seeing anywhere. Because I was like working at, 4 days a week at Castro Street and seeing like all sorts of sides of the 90s gay community that you never see depicted on TV or in film, like the feuds between lesbians and gay men, or like the older gay men and the entire missing generation that had all died of AIDS. So there was like all these younger men on the street, and, you know, or the guys who worked at our store. And like I was seeing like a lot of the politics of their world that, you know, I, as someone who was not gay but was like working there, I was like, oh, nobody ever talks about this stuff. And then I picked this guy's mystery novels, and I was like, well, he's talking about it all the time. It was like there was like this whole thing at that point, especially there was a group of activists in the area that, like, if you weren't HIV positive, they didn't even really consider you gay. And it was like a hardcore extremist faction. But that was in one of his books, and I was like, oh my God. Yeah. Wow. So someone is talking about this stuff. And then I started thinking about it, and I was like, oh yeah, you can talk about anything in a mystery novel, because you're just talking about life. Because, you know, like my stepdad's partner at his psychology firm, or whatever you call that, office, tried to get one of his patients to kill his wife when I was a teenager. And I was like, well, murder happens everywhere. You know, he just wanted out of his marriage, and he thought, oh, I have a patient.
Wow.
That's with my wife.
That is not a good shrink.
That's not a good
shrink. He went to prison, Matt. If you are Zooming with him, stop.
I don't, last time I will not listen to Yelp reviews.
Yeah, watch out for those listings on Psychology Today. Yeah, I gotta well, we have to wrap up, but before we go, if anybody wants to say any last thing about their series coming out or their book, feel free to go ahead. Emma, I know you.
I don't do comics. I don't know anything about publicity. I'm not the kind of guy who would promote something with a green screen backdrop.
You never do that.
Oh man.
Well, Emma and Alex and Matt, you all have stuff coming right out.
Yeah.
Emma, when does Inkblot come out?
Inkblot comes out in September. It's a YA fantasy, and you just follow a magical little cat, black cat, that can go into different worlds. You meet different characters. They go on new adventures. It's, you know, it's fun, but it's gonna have a whole story to it, you know? It's kind of, I would say, like, kind of set up-esque, like Game of Thrones, where you have a lot of protagonists, but, you know, you're still just following this one weird cat.
Yeah.
But it's fantastical. It's fun. I would say it's very much in the vein of Harry Potter, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. If you're into that kind of YA stuff, it'll be fun. Really. That's about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Matt, yours is
It's
coming
so crazy to think about. Like, we're just at this moment, like, what is the world going to look like in a month when these are all airing? It's just still seems unimaginable and strange on some level.
But buy my book.
Yeah, no. It all, you know, we launched a book last week and did no press for it because it felt gross. And while it doesn't, to kind of to loop back to Chuck's question about single comics going away, I don't think they will ever. I think the price point is a little out of whack right now, but like, it's portable, it's cheap to make, it should be cheap to buy, and easy to get, and it feels like it offers anybody tickets to other places whenever they need a ride, and I think there's a power and a potency in that particular format. So yeah, that's it. Yeah, I guess yay comics is my point.
Yay comics.
Question mark? I don't know. I sort of lost it there at the end, but yeah, I love that this is persevering through everything.
Yeah.
And yeah,
we're making it work. We're doing what we can.
I worried a lot about comic stores when the shutdown happened, but then I also thought, well, the fact that every comic store I've ever been to is like this individualistic kind of people who are getting by no matter what, I was kind of like, I'll probably do okay. Somehow, I'll, you know, like, it's going to be rough, but comics have gone through so much. You know, this is, of course, the worst thing that all of us have ever gone through our entire lives. So,
yeah.
Hopefully a month from now, different.
Hopefully, when you're watching this, it'll be okay.
It's going to be so much worse a month from now.
It is. It's going to be really bad. But on that note, thank you for watching, everybody. Thank you to everyone being here. Really appreciate it. Thanks for coming out to the virtual panel. And hopefully we'll all see each other in person next year. I don't know. We'll find out.
Maybe.
We'll see.